Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today I thought I'd bring you folks along as we check in on our summer tomatoes. Let's get going. So it's about mid-July now and our tomatoes are going full speed. I thought I'd bring everyone along before I went ahead and picked everything this morning, just so you can kind of see an idea of where we're at as far as how many tomatoes we have, how they're ripening, and what we're getting in the week. So let's step in here and take a look at this first garden. So before we step in the garden, actually, let's take a look from the outside here so you can see the Roma tomatoes in our Vejiga bed. They are doing fantastic now. They have come along quite a bit slower than the ones we'll take a look at in the pallet garden. And the reason for that is because, number one, they were put in 2 weeks afterwards, but more importantly, they don't start getting direct sunlight until probably the first week of June, whereas the pallet garden got it as soon as we put them in May. But you can see the size of these guys that are in here. What I'm hoping is that these tomatoes ripen and I can use some of the jalapenos on these plants over here to can me some salsa. I have a chorus of chickens behind me here. As you can see, our cherry tomatoes have already started going over the top of the trellis. I've had to sort of start bending them in. I like to let them get a little tall when I do so that I don't break the actual stem itself when the time comes to tie them up. Let's go take a look here. Now on the front side of this, you can see we've got a lot of cherry tomatoes we'll be picking today. These, just like the Romas we saw earlier, they started ripening after the cherry tomatoes that are in the pallet garden. Again, just because of the orientation to the sun. But now that the summer's in the full swing, we should get quite a bit more. I want to point out while we're in here, a lot of our tomatoes, because we've had a little bit of rain and heat, and obviously here in 7B, we have humidity all the time. All the tomatoes, except for these yellow pears, have done really well. I'm not sure if I'll grow the yellow pears any longer. We're gonna wait and see what they look like as the year goes along. The tomatoes themselves are delicious when you get them, but the plants seem to be a little bit fragile in this environment. Let's see, all the way up there on the top, we still have clusters of tomatoes forming. So before we step in here to look at the cherry tomatoes in the top garden, I just wanted to touch on the way that we prune our cherry tomatoes versus our other tomatoes. What I like to do with our cherry tomatoes is I just start from the bottom and work my way up to the first cluster of tomatoes. Once we start picking those and those clusters are done, I'll go ahead and trim everything up nice and neat and up to the next set of cherry tomato clusters. The reason for this is that these cherry tomatoes are going to be growing probably until our first freeze. So it's really important to keep them nice and tidy on the bottom to avoid any of the leaf spot or blight from getting in there and destroying our tomatoes prematurely. After all, I waited a whole winter for tomatoes and I want to keep these bad boys as long as I can. I also want to point out that we have not had a significant amount of pest pressure to date. Now, you know, it is Arkansas, so I'm sure that pressure is coming. I bring that up because you notice that we have basil and marigolds and things planted really liberally around all of our tomatoes this year. We're hoping that it continues to keep a lot of the pests away. Last year, it was a never-ending battle trying to take care of these tomatoes. I do want to point out, you can see what we were talking about as far as the trimming, how you can see the clusters down there and everything is kind of trimmed up neatly to them. Again, that's just to try to prevent blight and the leaf spot and that sort of stuff from taking hold on your plants. Once again, in this bed, you can see it's always the yellow pear tomatoes that are getting assaulted, you know, early onset blight here. We'll take this limb out. But you can see we have beautiful yellow pear tomatoes down here at the, and these things are absolutely delicious. I'm gonna keep my eye on them. If, you know, if all it is we keep getting a bunch of tomatoes, but all I have to do is a bit of trimming and it doesn't spread blight or anything to its neighbors, I'll probably continue to grow them. But, you know, just the beginning part of the summer, they are coming across as a bit fragile to me. Look at these. Those are the Sweet Millions that we grew last year. Those things are absolutely delicious. We haven't got any of the Dancing with Smurf tomatoes. So again, I don't know. We bought those because they look cool. I don't know if they're going to make it or not. We'll find out. You know, our zone is incredibly difficult for a lot of fruits and vegetables, but these orange cherry tomatoes will absolutely be a permanent fixture in our garden. In fact, Leslie and I were talking this morning, and as of right now, if you had to make me decide what I was growing next year, cherry tomato wise, we would just only grow the orange and the Sweet Million reds, because number one, they have fantastic flavor, and number two, they're prolific, and the third reason is they hold up really well to the heat and humidity that we have here. So here in the pallet garden, we have our Roma tomatoes, which we'll use to freeze and eat over the winter, and we have our large tomatoes that we use for slicing and eating with cucumbers, that sort of stuff. I just wanted to mention this before I got going. I am incredibly excited. This is the first year that we've grown tomatoes in our pallet garden. If it continues on like this, then more than likely this is going to be the permanent spots for our slicing tomatoes and our Roma tomatoes. So let's go look at it and you'll see why. So as we approach the Roma bed, you can see just the sheer amount of tomatoes that we have in these beds. As we get across here to the other side. Now this is the east side. Traditionally, the east side of our tomato beds have ripened less. As we go over here to the side that faces the setting sun, the west side, you'll see a lot more of them have started to ripen. So by the end of the day, I would guess tomorrow, maybe even 2 days from now, we will start roasting and freezing our winter Roma tomatoes. Let's see if we can get in here and you can see what I'm talking about. Now, Roma tomatoes are a determinate variety, but they will put off several different ones, right? So down here are the first round, and then you can see they have a second round. And then in my experience, once you get the first round off, they'll even put a third round. The third round will be a less and the tomatoes come out smaller. But I found that they're actually really sweet and some of the best tasting of the year. So if you put the time and effort in to keeping your determinate varieties healthy, you can get quite a few rounds off of them before they expire. Look at this volunteer cherry tomato that we have in here. I always forget to pick it whenever I'm pulling our cherry tomatoes, just because we didn't plant it in here. It just came up whenever the Roma tomatoes were coming up. So I'm not sure if I dropped a seed or if the chickens got in there and dropped a seed or what happened, but it's putting off, and it's one of the Sweet Millions. The tomatoes are delicious, so I don't want to complain too much. All right, let's go take a look over here at the slicing tomatoes. And these are, we've picked about 4 or 5 of these already, and they are absolutely delicious. You can see these are turning. Ooh, this one might be done by end of the day. But they are phenomenal as far as taste is concerned. They grow all weird looking, which is fine. It gives them some character, I guess, right? You're not winning. I'm not looking to win in any beauty awards with tomatoes. I would much rather win the flavor awards. One thing I will point out, for some reason on these big Beefmaster, I'm sorry, these are beef steaks, not Beef Masters. That's what we grew last year. These large beefsteak tomatoes, we haven't gotten any like hornworms like on the foliage, but we did get a round of these weird black and yellow striped worms, and I just brought out some neem oil and sprayed the tomatoes really well, and it took care of them. The odd thing was I couldn't see them, and as I was spraying them, you could just see them drop off by the dozens. I cannot imagine what would have happened if I wouldn't have noticed those worms, I would have had to, oh, I would have just been super upset if I would have lost all my tomatoes just because I was distracted looking for hornworms and missed any of the worms on my actual tomatoes. Well, I hope you folks enjoyed this as much as I have. This is my very favorite time of year. You come out, you get to pick the garden. We have cucumbers and ground cherries and squash and all kinds of stuff coming out of the garden to eat. But the most exciting thing for me is coming out in the morning and looking at our tomatoes and trying to determine which ones will be ready by the end of the day. And if, you know, especially the slicing tomatoes and the cherry tomatoes, I've already got like the next week worth of tomato food planned out. So I try not to waste any of it, and I try to make sure that I stop, take a deep breath, and enjoy it while I have the fresh tomatoes, because it won't be long, and I'll be talking to you folks about I can't wait to have fresh tomatoes again. So, as always, I appreciate you all for taking the time to hang out with me today. Until next time, I hope everyone takes care of themselves. Peace.